Hello and welcome to episode 146 of the Nintendo Fun Club podcast. I'm Ryan, and joining me as always is John.
What's up, Ryan?
Hey, this episode is kind of one of our favorite topics to talk about on this show. Something we've talked about many, many times, and that is Castlevania. Specifically for this episode, we are going to be talking about the Netflix series, which the first four episodes just aired, and also the game that the series is kind of loosely based on, which is Castlevania 3 on the NES. Before we get started, I should just say the Netflix series did turn out to be adult oriented, more so than I think a lot of us expected. So we always try to keep the show pretty clean, and we will definitely not be repeating some of the foul language on that show, but we are probably going to be referring to things that happened in the show. So if you're listening to this with your
Little
kids in the
ones.
car, you may want to save it for another time, or else you're gonna have to explain some really weird stuff that we're going to allude to. So just want to give that warning right out the gate. But so let's go ahead and get into this. You got something on your mind?
No, I was just going to say that, I was actually worried it was going to be more quote unquote adult or mature or whatever than it was. I mean, disclaimer is totally warranted. There's some very adult stuff in the show, but like some of the comments that the producer of the show had made, like when the show was announced about how it was going to be, I don't have the comments in front of me, but like super mature and like a totally extreme, like I think he said like a hard R rating and all that stuff. Like,
Mm-hmm.
turns out to be true for sure, but like I don't know, I guess I was super nervous about that, and I will say that it didn't go as far as I thought it could. Like I guess those comments made me think that like our goal with the show is to really push the limit and like shock people and make it like as like grotesquely mature as possible, and I don't think it was that crazy, especially if you compare it to like some anime and stuff that's like goes pretty wild with like adult content.
Mm-hmm.
It could have been worse, like in terms of really getting out of control with like super mature adult stuff. So, as somebody who was nervous about that, I feel like it was not as extreme as I was led to believe it may have been.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely it skirted with that stuff. Like by the end of the first episode, I was a little surprised, even though I kind of knew what to expect, especially since one of the most I don't know, I guess vulgar scenes was something that we've known about since like 2003, when Warren Ellis was doing the first kind of interviews about the show, and that scene, of course, implied some interspecies relations, and it's gone about in a pretty crass way, and like I was kind of like surprised that it was in there, and then I was like, no, I knew this was going to be in there in some capacity, and
So
then
can you fill me in on what you're talking about, like with knowing it was going to be in there since 2003 or whatever? Because I don't
okay,
understand.
or maybe it was like 2007. Whenever Warren Ellis first like did the did an interview and said like, "Hey, I'm writing this Castlevania movie." It was an animated movie at the time, I think, and he's like, "Yeah, there's totally a scene where some guys talk about um,
Yeah.
The bad stuff
Yep.
that we don't usually talk about on this show because there's
Getting really
typically
personal with a goat, right? Like,
yes, yeah. There's never really any reason for us to discuss that on this fun Nintendo all ages podcast.
yeah, we'll see. That's that kind of thing right there. Is like that's what I mean when I'm saying like it's not the show didn't turn out to be as like crass and like pushing that hard R thing as hard as like the fact that in interviews Warren Ellis was like, oh yeah, here's a thing that's in the Castlevania, like almost like here's how I'll sell you on the Castlevania show as I'm writing this scene with the goat, and you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
that's like would make me run away, like no, get me, I don't want to see that, like I don't like that, does not sound like a show I want to watch. You know what I mean? So the fact that like that was a talking point 10 years before it actually came out, just it could have really set the table for a super embarrassing, terrible thing. You know what I mean? And it turned out to be not that. I'm still not sure that scene. Well, actually, I know I'm not sure that scene needed to be in there. Like, it added nothing to the show for me, and almost made me want to stop watching after the first episode. But
that's my favorite part of the Castlevania games.
Well, I know when I was playing the Castlevania games on the NES, yeah, so I was thinking about like that villager I just ran past probably just got done hanging out with a goat, somewhere like.
Yeah, it's definitely implied.
Oh, for sure.
In
Yeah.
those 8-bit sprites. Yeah. Okay. So now that that's out of the way, yeah, I do think like after, there's like some more shocking, like that the language and stuff, whatever in just hearing like F-bombs and stuff, I was like, oh, I guess I wasn't expecting that. Because, that's not really something you hear in Castlevania games.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, I feel like it kind of cools a bit after the first 2 episodes, because I definitely either I got totally desensitized to it, but or it just kind of like they slowed down on that stuff, like the language and the gore, because it wasn't like as jarring to me in like the 3rd and especially the 4th episode.
I 100% agree. To me, I don't know if it's too early to be, saying this yet or not, but like to me, the show absolutely improves as it goes on. It gets a lot better as it goes. I'd like to go back and watch it over again and watch those first 2 episodes, especially not really the first 2 episodes over again, and see what I think now that I know the sort of totality of the show or whatever. But it seems to me, and this is one of the problems I guess I have with it, it seems to me that the producers, the writers, whoever felt that they needed to maybe present it as a not very video gamey type of thing initially, and then I feel like the kind of the stuff that I think is fun about Castlevania starts to get peppered in as the show goes on. But like the first episode and second episode, to me, the first episode is cool in retrospect, but like you only see Trevor at the very end of it, and otherwise it's just like this like meditation on like the hypocrisy of organized religion. And I'm just which I think is cool. It's interesting. It's an interesting topic, but I'm like, this is not what I'm looking for in a Castlevania show necessarily. You know what I mean? It just wasn't what I expected. And I felt like, man, there's so little of like what I like about Castlevania early on, but then I saw how they would introduce those things as the show went further. And by the end, when you have, hopefully I can talk about this now, but like Alucard and Trevor having this big showdown and this big fight, like, and Sypha and Trevor are like going through like the basement of the castle and all. It's like, oh, this is totally Castlevania. This is like a video game, and I was into it. But early on, I feel like they wanted to hook people with like, oh no, man, this is a show for grown-ups. It's like a totally cool, like there's tons of swearing. We're going to talk about relations with goats. Like, your anti-hero is like more interested in alcohol than anything else in the world. Like, it's totally an edgy, grown-up, cool guy show. And then in episodes 3 and 4, they're like, but here's all the cool video game stuff. Yeah. So, I don't know if you felt that way or not, but that's the vibe I got from the show.
Okay. So for me, like actually the first moments of the show, the first moments of the first episode, like I was like, oh, I was happy with Lisa showing up at the end a sense of who Dracula is at that point. Like he had obviously like, he talks about like, about like the bodies on dicks outside of the castle, and he's like, yeah, I don't add it anymore. And like, he's obviously off, but now at the point where the show's, that flashback sequence, he's kind of just like this dude messing like his alchemy lab, and like Lisa's there, she's like, I heard you get off on and all of that, and he's like, he's like, I could do it. And who are you to just like come in here now? She kind of like wins him over with her resolve and stuff, and I thought that was really cool. And that's and it was extra cool because that's, most of this show is based on Castlevania 3, loosely, but like the stuff with Lisa and Dracula, and them being the parents of Alucard, that is like straight up from Symphony of the Night. And there's even a quote when she is being burned at the stake. There's a quote where she's like, don't blame the humans, don't hate the humans, and that's straight out of Symphony of the Night. So I thought like that stuff was really, really cool, and I was like, whoa, they're going there. Like this is awesome. And then we got to some of the other stuff in the first episode, and the stuff in like the pub and all of that. And then I was like, oh wait, I don't know how into this I am really. And then I was kind of like on the fence through like the end of the first episode, and pretty much all the way through the second episode. And then it was like the third and fourth episodes that really started to win me over.
Yeah, it's basically how I feel too. I mean, I thought that the Dracula Lisa stuff in the beginning was well done for sure. And like, I was into it. And then like by the end of the first episode, I was kind of, I don't know about this. Just like you said, my thing though, is I haven't finished or played all the way through Symphony of the Night. I've played part of it, but I haven't played all of it. And so I didn't really know that story with Lisa and Dracula. I don't know if that's in the beginning of the game or the end or whatever, but like, I don't really remember that. From Symphony of the Night. So to me, I was thinking like, okay, I've played Castlevania a bunch on like NES and stuff, and I don't remember Dracula being this like complicated, like, I feel more sympathetic for Dracula in the first episode of the show than anybody else. And like that's
Trevor.
Oh, like 100%. I mean,
yeah.
That's still true by the end of the show. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, but it's fine. And I mean, I know like, obviously you take like the NES Castlevania game, you need to add more to it to make it a compelling show, especially if you want it to reach people outside of just like fans of the old Castlevania games, and even Castlevania itself has obviously evolved in terms of the storytelling and stuff like that as the series has gone on. And, Symphony of the Night and the DS and Game Boy Advance games, which I have played, pretty extensively, are demonstrative of that too. So, I mean, like, it makes sense to flesh that story out and everything. I feel like they really made Dracula like super sympathetic early on though, in the show. So that'll be interesting to see where that goes, like in, later seasons and stuff like that. Like Alucard, at the end of the show is like, yeah, totally, we got to go kill my dad. And I'm like, I mean, what he did was really bad, but also like, he seems to not really suck that bad. You know what I mean? So it's like, I don't know.
Yeah. And a lot of like that, the philosophical Dracula, I guess. Again, kind of out of, Symphony of the Night, where like even in like the first scene of Symphony of the Night where um, blood ending, um, where Richter's in there fighting him, and Dracula's got all these like hot takes about the human condition and stuff.
What is
The
a
what
man?
is a man?
Yeah.
Nothing but a pile of secrets and miserable pile of secrets, and all that stuff. So like that wasn't like totally out of character, and it was actually like very much in line with his portrayal in Symphony of the Night. So I thought that was really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so uh, some of the other things that I really liked in it were I really liked Sypha and the Belandes uh, family, which is something I had really never like thought about. Like I knew that those characters showed up in various Castlevania games. Like Sypha made her first appearance in uh Castlevania 3, and then like you have I think in Aria of Sorrow you have someone descended from that line in there. But yeah, I thought she was really cool. Just like a really strong, cool, like focused character. Um, Whereas she served as like an interesting sort of foil to Trevor, I think, where Trevor was kind of like directionless and like denying his skills and his lineage, whereas Sypho was like, no, this is what I have to do, even if it kills me, no matter what the cost is. So like I thought like she was um, a really cool character.
Yeah, her character is great, and the way her character is sort of like uncovered and stuff was like a big part of hooking me on the show. With the Cyclops in the basement, and even her like family, and that the what are they called, not the Seekers, what are they, the Whisperers? No, that's
Oh
not right either. But you know what I'm talking
no,
about.
yeah.
That group of people, like their whole thing, like that's that kind of stuff for me is when it went from being like super serious, like grown up show, to like, yeah, we're acknowledging this is fun and it's based on a video game and stuff like that. Like those more fantastical elements being introduced. Um, that's a big part of why I like it. And yeah, I think her character was great. All throughout, she was a lot of fun. So
Yeah, and yeah, I like that she was she had been turned to stone, and and then when Trevor defeated the Cyclops, then she was, uncovered from the stone, which is like the same way you get her in Castlevania 3. You beat the Cyclops boss, and then she's like the statue crumbles and she comes out. So like that was a really nice touch, and that was again like one of those moments that really started to kind of like win me over there.
yeah.
For sure. Let's see, something else I kind of liked about it, which I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I thought it was like super effective, and it gave me like good Castlevania vibes, was the fact that in the in like episodes, I guess, I don't know, 2, 3, and 4, when the monsters started like really attacking the village on like a regular schedule, they would only attack at night, which I don't know. Again, I don't know if this was intentional, probably not, but it definitely gave me vibes of Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. Whereas like, when you go into a town at night, it's all like overrun with monsters and everyone's hiding in their homes. And that seemed to be kind of what was happening here. And that's that monsters attacking at night is not like a new concept, and it's not something exclusive to Castlevania 2, but like in the context of a Castlevania animated show, those were the vibes I got, and I really liked that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's cool. Yeah, hard to say. I mean, it could have been not a happy accident, because it's not going to be accidental to have, like, especially a show about vampires or a vampire, like for the enemies to be attacking at night. But yeah,
Yeah.
it totally could have been a reference to the best Castlevania game, Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest.
Mm.
So hard to say, but
Okay. So like I guess we can start to get into some of the things we didn't so much care for. We've kind of implied some of those, and talking about things that I didn't care for in this is not like really. I don't mean it as just like fanboy whining or anything. Like, it's stuff like I honestly want to see improved, because I do think this show does have a lot of potential, and like I want it to be good. Like, I'm definitely going to be watching season 2, and there's just and I did enjoy my time with season 1. There's just a few things that personally I think could be better going forward. So, and I think you have some criticisms as well.
oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
like I've said, like I was not even sold on if I liked the show at all until the third episode, probably, or the end of the second. So there's definitely stuff
Yeah.
in there that was pretty off-putting for me.
Okay. So, like what?
Well, we've already talked about it, but the swearing and the, like, I guess, sexual comments and stuff like that, I don't have a problem with those things like in my entertainment necessarily, but especially in the first couple episodes, it's so excessive, I feel like, in the context of what this show is, that it's like, showing off is not the right word, but it's almost like, oh man, look how mature we are, we're going to drop the F-bomb every other word, and like we have this extended conversation about goats, like, because we can, and to show that like we're super grown up. It didn't seem necessary, except for to try to posture as like hardcore extreme for total grown-ups. Like, I think that's the only purpose for that stuff. I don't know. It just doesn't ever feel natural. Like you watch a good movie or like a well-written piece of entertainment that includes adult content, it's in there because it feels like the conversations are realistic to the kind of conversations people have. You know what I mean? I don't have a problem with swearing in movies or TV shows or whatever, but when it seems completely unrealistic, like excessive and in there to try to make some kind of point or something, then it just pulls me out of the experience. I really like Kevin Smith movies, but I think one legitimate criticism of like, the Kevin Smith movies that I like is that sometimes the dialogue feels very unrealistic. Maybe you can call that being stylized or something, but sometimes it just like the swearing can be so excessive that I'm like, I can't even concentrate on like being in this movie right now, because the dialogue is so heavily laden with like, the F word, that it's just, all I can think about is, why are you putting this many like F-bombs into these sentences? Because nobody talks like that, So that sort of thing kind of drives me crazy. And I don't know. I'd like to hear somebody make a good argument as to like why this show about vampires and, vampire hunters centuries ago has to like be just full of swearing. It just doesn't feel right in any way to me. It feels excessive and like somebody's trying to prove a point or something.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I definitely, I'm someone who like, I kind of felt the same way about Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Like, where I'm just, because I'm used to like my high fantasy being like Lord of the Rings and stuff, like, and like Dragonlance and stuff like that, which is all very like PG 13. So when I first watched well, when I first like read the first Game of Thrones book, and then when I watched the first season of the HBO show, I was like, this is so weird. Like, for like this thing about like dragons and stuff, like and like obviously that's successful. It ended up not really being my thing, but obviously, that's like those are well written books. That's a well made TV show. And people really love it. So I think maybe is that like the new standard for like period style fantasy entertainment?
Maybe it is to include that kind of language and to include a lot of sexual content and to try to like really like mature it up or whatever. Maybe that is the new standard. I don't know. But I have seen every episode of Game of Thrones. I like the show. I'm definitely not some like kind of super fan or something. Some of it I like more than, other episodes or whatever. But like, I like the show. But I don't feel like when I'm watching that show and characters are using that kind of language or it has like super adult content, I don't feel like it pulls me out of the experience in the same way because like, let's say two characters in Game of Thrones are having a conversation and there's swearing involved. It's not like to an unnatural degree. Like, sometimes I swear when I speak, you know what I mean? But usually I don't swear at a rate of like, 3 swear words every 10 words I utter. And like sometimes I felt like when Trevor was like walking around drunk, like my God, you know what I mean? Like it never felt realistic or like how that character would really speak. In actuality, it felt like, dude, I got the F-bomb button on this keyboard and I'm just going to keep hitting it because that'll show how like grown up things are, So to me, it's almost like it seems silly to be talking about a cartoon about vampires and be like, it's not realistic, but there's a way to write dialogue for any kind of genre, any kind of like, whether it's stylized or fantasy or whatever, like there's a way to write dialogue that feels like it would be actually spoken by those people. And there's a way to write dialogue that like constantly calls attention to itself. And I don't think that's a good thing when it's constantly calling attention to itself. And that's my issue with it. Like, I don't care if it's rated R and it has swearing, and I don't care that they, talk about like crude things, but if you hit me over the head with it, I'm not going to be more engaged. I'm going to be less so. Like, that's where I come down.
Yeah.
Like I feel like a prude, like, oh no, they're swearing and crude. I don't care. It's just like the way it's done is not well done, I think.
No, I totally agree with that. And like I said, like I found it like most jarring in the first 2 episodes. And then either I became desensitized to it or they kind of chilled on that, which I think it was more of the latter. Because for episodes 3 and 4, like that was not the thing I was thinking about as I was watching.
I think they totally chilled, and it's all just obviously speculation or assumptions. But to me, it feels like they felt they needed to do that to get people into it. Like if we just lead with it being a fanciful vampire hunting adventure, people are not going to be into it that much. But if we prove right away that no, this is for you, it's for grown-ups and stuff, like then they could, reveal more of what makes Castlevania. So that's or I don't know, maybe that's not even right because like the Dracula stuff, like you said, like is out of Symphony of the Night, and there's probably a lot of stuff. I'm not like the ultimate Castlevania fan. There's probably a lot of stuff in there that really is straight from the games and I'm not seeing. And maybe that's not a fair, like it's too general of a statement to make, but I just feel like the show didn't speak to me initially because they were trying to pull in other people and other audiences. And I think they felt like this is the way to do it, and then they could chill after that because they'd get people hooked is what it seems like.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's, I guess it like, it forces you to take notice of it. It's a bold start, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. And I do think, I really do think that, like, I went into this pretty skeptically. I would assume you did too. Because video game adaptations usually don't work very well. And the comments by the producer last year made me really nervous, or earlier this year, whenever it was, it made me really nervous, and it set me up to think I'm not going to like this, you know?
Yeah.
So I went into it pretty critically, and that stuff did not land well with me, but I kept watching, and by the end I really liked the show a lot. I feel like the point I'm trying to make here is I feel like if I went back and watched those first 2 episodes again, and I will at some point, I think I will be able to relax more and probably forgive some of that stuff a little more easily now that I know that in totality I like the show. Like overall I like it. So I feel like that stuff's not going to weird me out as much as it did when I didn't know that I'd really like episodes 3
Yeah.
and 4. You know, I think that's going to
Yeah.
help.
Yeah. No, definitely. How did you feel about the animation quality?
Um, I thought it was fine. You know, I guess like you have like with animation, and this is something that's been like on my mind quite a bit recently because of Star Wars Forces of Destiny.
Yeah, we've been talking about this a lot.
I feel like, and I don't know, maybe I'm just whatever, but I feel like people talk about animation a lot, and they really mean like art direction when they say animation. Because to me, like
I'm
this,
not. No, no, no. I'm not talking about art direction.
yeah,
I'm
but
talking about like the actual fluidity of the animation.
right. So like with the art direction, I was
Mhm,
pretty happy. I didn't think it was
mhm,
anything like particularly impressive, and in fact, I would have preferred like a more stylized kind of thing because I feel like they went for like a sort of a realistic like the human beings, like human characters and stuff. I feel like they tried to just make
mhm.
them, I don't know. It was all kind of standard looking, I thought, in terms of that kind of stuff. Animation wise, I don't know. I thought it was pretty good overall, but like I guess I don't know very much about modern animation, but I feel like I can see the hallmarks of modern animation, like in shows like this, where again, I'm super uneducated about this stuff, but to me, I see like the only way I know how to describe it is like the flash type look of stuff, like when something kind of slides across the screen, or you can
Uh-huh.
see that like different elements are totally like one element is static and they're just like kind of sliding something around with a mouse. It looks like almost, you know, that kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
Like I noticed that kind of stuff and it kind of drives me crazy. And then like with Forces of Destiny, people are like, oh, the animation's so good. And I'm like thinking to myself, like, really what you like is the art direction, and that's fine, but the animation is
Okay.
not that
Yeah.
great. You know what I mean? That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Like, so with I think the animation is pretty good, but there's definitely stuff I see where I'm like, I don't know, it's just got that like sort of modern animation look that is not always the best. But like I feel like such a neophyte even talking about this because I really don't know. I don't have like the technical understanding to really describe this stuff, but I can
Yeah.
I can feel like, you know what I mean? Like I can sort of see like, oh, that thing just slid across in a way that like
Hmm.
if this was totally hand drawn like 20 years ago, it wouldn't look like that, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I actually I thought the art direction and like the general look of it was pretty good. Like there was enough like little detail in like the outfits and like the way the town looked and um stuff like that where I thought it was a pretty good vibe. I thought like the monsters, a lot of those were pretty cool looking. Even though maybe not necessarily ripped straight from Castlevania lore necessarily, a lot of them were kind of just monsters that haven't really appeared in Castlevania games, at least looking like that. Maybe they're based on something, but um, a lot of it was kind of like just D&D monster manual type stuff, like like gargoyle looking things, and um, but I did think they were like cool, and I thought um, like the gothicness of it, like it the setting worked. The setting worked, and I think like the again like the outfits and everything. I like that. The way Trevor's outfit looked once he like took off the weird fur coat thing. And I liked Elucard's when he finally put a shirt on. His like his like his coat, which was, straight out of Symphony of the Night. I thought that was really cool, and like Sypha's robes and stuff, like all that looked cool. And like, the peasants in the village, they, look like peasants in a village of that time. So I like the art direction a lot. I did I felt like I did see a little bit of what you were kind of describing as like flash-like in the animation, where there were just like occasional, like, I don't know, like a head turn, or like, and most of the action scenes were actually, I thought, were pretty like fluid. But some of just like the, characters walking, and just more like subtle like conversation and stuff, like it was a lot of just like, you know static images with like slight, like little bits of animation that sometimes felt a little stilted. And again, like I don't really have the vocabulary to articulate that in like the proper terminology, but it did feel a little stilted at times. But overall, I think it was fine. And again, it's another one of those things, like I felt like it kind of improved by the end, because like when I was watching like the, in the last sort of scene, like the Trevor Alucard fight scene, I was like, oh yeah, this looks really good. Like, and it's not surprising, like a lot of times with animation, the first few episodes don't look great, because it's like the team, finding their footing and stuff, and kind of normalizing the designs and all of that. So, yeah, I think by the end, it looked good. I'm hoping that when season 2 starts, it will look as good as episode 4.
Yeah.
Because I definitely felt like there was an improvement by the end of the series.
Yeah, I would agree. And even any little complaints I have about the animation, they're not significant. Like they didn't take me out of the experience, or it's not really. I saw moments where I felt like, oh yeah, that kind of like, I don't know, it's not necessarily the highest quality, or maybe like I noticed a little thing here that could be better, but like overall I feel like the animation was good. And it's not a $20 million animated movie or something. It's like a show for Netflix, and like I can accept that. And the same thing with Forces of Destiny. Like the animation, I think definitely there's some issues with it, like, but those are probably budgetary issues. It's not like it's bad. It's just there's a certain amount of money you have to work with. You have to use a certain style. You have to use a certain technique to get these things done. I would say, if anything, with this show, like the fact that I only notice those things every once in a while, I mean, it's probably indicative of like a certain budget and a certain like technique and like level of animation that was, they were able to use. And most of the time I'm not noticing that because it's pretty well done. So I think it was good. Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah. Soundtrack, I barely even noticed. There was no bloody tears. There's no like, there's nothing. There's no like, again, I don't know if that could be a licensing issue. That could be a Konami thing. That could be all kinds of stuff. But is that a conscious decision of, we don't want this to feel too video gamey, so we're not going to throw in like ba-da-ba-bum, ba-da-da-da. But that would have gone a long. I would have loved that,
I know, especially you just save it for like the last like 5 seconds of episode 4, where they're like all walking out of the crypt. Like, do it then. That would have killed. Like, that moment already was awesome. Yeah, that's an interesting choice. Again, yeah, like I didn't even notice the soundtrack, which is a problem, because that's something like you associate with Castlevania.
Yeah, like I don't really remember it at all, and I think it was probably like mostly atmospheric type music and stuff, right? Like more
Mhm.
like moody type stuff instead of, the big memorable themes that we associate with Castlevania. So I don't know. At least in the action sequences, I would have loved some integration of the video game music.
Yeah, which I mean, there's ways to do it. Like, I'm not like I don't think either of us are talking about like, oh, you got to throw in some like straight up like chip tunes in
Yeah.
here or anything. But like, you can have variations on those themes, or even just like hitting a few of the notes or something in like a larger piece. Like some sort of throwback there would have been really good. And I don't think that would have been like pandering or fan servicey or anything. I think that's like an essential part of the Castlevania DNA. So I think um, that's something that should have been in there. Like I I don't really buy any excuse for there not at least being um, hints at, or just like, again, just like a few notes or something.
Well, it's like one of the things I wonder about with this show is like the producers, the writers, etc. Like, what was their sort of mission statement for themselves? Were they thinking like, I love these Castlevania games and I want to create something that is really representative of like the experience of playing those games or like the vibe of those games? Or was it sort of like, oh, the idea of a vampire hunter tracking down like Dracula is a cool idea, and the way they did it back in the 80s was sort of cheesy or whatever, but we're going to make it like, cool for 2015, and like we're going to sort of take that kernel of an idea and then do our own thing with it. I'm not sure. I'm sure the reality is somewhere in between those two things,
Mm-hmm.
but you know what I mean? Like, to me, there were a lot of moments where I thought to myself, like, this could have been more inspired by the games, instead of more like looking at the games as a place to start from, sort of. But I don't know. Again, that's sort of like the my initial impression talking
Mm-hmm.
over what it became in the end, because in the end it was more anime video gamey feeling and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
but with the music, it's just like, God, like you said, almost no excuse. And like you have to choose to leave like iconic music like the Castlevania music out of the show, unless there's some legal issue, which there very well could be. But
There could be, but you'd think that Konami would be able to figure that out.
and that
Like,
Konami owns the rights to that music, and just like they own
yeah.
the rights to the characters and the intellectual property, and if they can license that stuff, why not be able to license the music? Unless it's a budget thing where they just don't want to pay like the residuals or whatever it is to the composers, but that doesn't seem legit.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
don't know.
they hired a new composer for
Yeah.
the series to create original music
Right.
with I mean, and yeah, like you'd still have to have hire a composer to like arrange, the music, because you can't just use it as is. Like, can't just
Right.
take like the Red Book audio from Symphony of the Night and put it in there, which would have been awesome.
Yeah.
I would have been in too, but I think most people would have been like, what is going on with this?
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I don't know. Like, I feel like that's probably my biggest complaint, and that is just because, like, I think Castlevania soundtracks from the NES games through, the 16-bit titles, through Symphony of the Night, through the DS games, like, it's some of like the best video game music like ever, and it's from different composers. And but like, you think Castlevania soundtracks, and you think, like like gothic, baroque rock music,
Yeah.
and that's so essential to the DNA of the series, that to just have like a generic film score, um just yeah, there's just, again, like no excuse.
Yeah.
Like, it's missing a huge piece. It's like, Star Wars without like the John Williams motifs and stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I think like I don't know, I really do like the show, and I'm excited for the second season, and I
Mhm.
plan on watching this first season again. So I don't want it to sound like I don't like the show, but you know, for me, the big thing I wrestled with throughout the whole show, and it got better as it went, as I've been kind of saying all night, but the big thing for me is like if somebody sits me down and says like, well, what is Castlevania to you? You know what I mean? To me, I'm gonna say like it's an adventure about tracking down a vampire and fighting a bunch of like cool monsters along the way. It is not really horror because yeah, it's like a monster movie, but almost like, and I know it's very inspired by like Universal monster movies and stuff, but like in the same way that like I'm not going to show my kid Halloween or Friday the 13th, but I will show them, the Wolfman and Dracula and Creature from the Black Lagoon because they're horror, but they're just they're so much less. It's so much more innocuous than like modern horror. It's like you're in a spooky setting. You're in Transylvania. You're going into a castle. There's monsters. Ooh, it doesn't delve into like true horror really. And like to me, that's what
Mhm.
Castlevania sort of is. And like I've already said earlier tonight, like Castlevania, like what it is and what it means, it does change over time because I think what it is in like 1987 is not what it necessarily is in 2008 or whenever those like modern Castlevania games were coming out. And it's just like what Castlevania is to me, and it's different for different people. But
Mhm.
um, I don't know. I think that it's a difficult task to make a show like this because you have to appeal to modern audiences. Like you have to appeal to Netflix their subscribers, and you can make a show about Dracula or whatever, and you can do that in a way that is going to appeal to like adult mature like Netflix subscribers, whatever. But I want it to also appeal to me, somebody who loves just like the idea of like a dude with a whip, like going
Mhm.
through all these different locations, fighting. Like first I fought a Frankenstein, and then bunch of creature from the Black Lagoon started popping out of nowhere, and like that stuff
Mhm.
is like like a huge part of Castlevania for me. Even in like the DS and GBA era and whatever, when the stories became more intricate and more complex and whatever, it was still like at the end of the day, like colorful and like a bunch of goofy monsters you're fighting. And, that kind of stuff, I would love to get a little more of that flavor in the cartoon.
Mhm.
That's kind of where my complaints about the show are. But, as I've said, a bunch, it really does kind of go more in that direction toward the end. And, I guess it has to be a good show independent of the games, right? And like I think it's pretty good, like as an independent thing. It actually as an independent thing, I think it's better than what it is when I view it like really tied to the Castlevania series.
Mhm.
Because it's actually like if I start to think about the games and how I view the games, that's maybe when the show starts to fall apart a little for me. Whereas if I just view it as something independently, like a show about Dracula and stuff, like I probably like it more because I'm not like, well, where's the Castlevania music? And like, why aren't there any mummies running around that I'm fighting? And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's almost like when I compare it to the games is when it's weaker for me than if I'm just like, this is a show I watched.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I felt again, like kind of like I said earlier, I felt a little bit more of a connection to the games, just because, and maybe that was just like me projecting, but or seeing what I wanted to see. But like, I mentioned, the stuff I saw that gave me Castlevania 2 vibes and the Symphony of the Night vibes. And obviously, it's hitting a lot of the same story beats as Castlevania 3, in its own weird way. Um, but yeah, I don't know. Like, I guess like kind of where I come down on it is, I liked it. I liked it by the end. Definitely, like I was super engaged, and definitely by the fourth episode, and um, I'm excited to see where it goes. I don't think it was without problems, but um, that's kind of the talking point for Castlevania these days. It's kind of been that way for the past like I don't know 10 years or so. Um, but yeah, like man, when it comes down to the question of like, what is Castlevania to you? Because I mean, you know, even just between Castlevania 1 and 2 on the NES, like I think there's huge differences. And is it a series about exploration? Is it horror? Is it like hardcore platforming? You know, is it just a Dracula story? Is it, whatever? Um, but to me, like, as long as they're like the major notes that I like to see Castlevania hit are soundtrack is huge for me, and just I don't know, just cool gothic baroque vibes, because that's such an uncommon um, sort of aesthetic in media in general, not just in video games. Like it's kind of crazy that, um, as popular as Castlevania was in its heyday, especially in like the 8 and 16-bit era, um, that there's not really many imitators in um, aesthetic wise. Like, yeah, like obviously there's a bajillion action games in the 8-bit era that like took after Castlevania, and there's a bajillion indie Metroidvanias now. But at the time, uh, and I mean ever, there's not really many games that kind of tap into that setting and aesthetic. And you know as someone who's a fan of you know like, I'm a fan of the Universal horror movies, but I'm also a fan of like Bram Stoker's Dracula the book, and the Francis Ford
The
Coppola
Coppola.
movie, and which is totally different. Like, Dracula 1931 is so different than the Coppola movie, which the Coppola movie is kind of that more like edgy, like violent, like way more sexual vibe. But even like, you had Dracula in the 30s, and then like the Hammer horror movies with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee and stuff in the 50s, which were like way more gory, and a lot more of like the sexual stuff in there too. And like all of that is still like, I don't know, like it's all valid to me. And that's kind of how I feel about Castlevania, this series. Like, I love Castlevania 1. I love Castlevania 2. I love Castlevania 3 and 4. I love Rondo of Blood. I love Symphony of the Night. Like, I love Aria of Sorrow, and I even love Circle of the Moon. Like, um, and those games are all like very different, but they have that core of like, you know, gothic baroque action and good soundtracks. And I think the Netflix series hit the gothic baroque action side of it for me, and there were enough allusions to the games that I was happy. But I think the missing piece for me is the soundtrack.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. And I'm not much of a story guy in games, which we've talked about a bunch before. Like, I like simple stories told mainly through gameplay, and I tend to forget a lot about like dialogue and text heavy stories and stuff. There are exceptions to that rule, of course. Like, one of my favorite games in recent years is Gone Home, and it's all story, it's all text, like, whatever. It's no hard and fast rules or anything, but like with Castlevania, I still love the games like that I've played from later on in the lineage, like the GBA and DS ones that had way more story. But like at the end of the day, that stuff washes over me and I pretty much forget about it. But like the gameplay itself is still really fun, and that's what I'm into. And you know, you mentioned like the Gothic Baroque thing. I think like as the games went on, as the stories got more complex, it also like the art style, you know, like Dracula in the original games, like looks basically like 1931 Dracula. You know what I mean? Like he's
Right.
got like even in Super Castlevania 4, he's got like this big cape thing, I think, right? And he's
Yeah.
got like the hair and all that. And it's just like and then, but then as it goes on, like all of a sudden he's got like a goatee and long hair, and like the art style and the story style really changed quite a bit, I think, as it went on. But the gameplay, it changed, it evolved totally a ton too, like all these RPG elements, and like it definitely changed a bunch. But like I still was like fighting Frankensteins and mummies and like platforming and like I don't know.
Mhm.
There's to me, there's that core gameplay experience, which is what I really love about Castlevania. And when that works, like they can go all different directions with, like even on the DS, the first one, I think it was
Dawn of
what
Sorrow.
Dawn of Sorrow. Isn't that the one that has like the anime look to it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
and then actually, the second one does too, right? Kind of like the
Portrait of
anime
Ruin.
art
Yeah.
style, but then like with the third one, they went back to, you know, the style, the art style, like in terms of the packaging and the production art and everything of like the GBA games, right? So, but like I barely noticed that stuff. It doesn't really matter that much to me because like that core gameplay experience is still there, or there's enough of it there that is what I'm into. So, I mean, for me personally, I'd rather see it be more like 1931 Dracula, Monster Squad. Like
Mm.
it's it's scary, but it's like the fun kind of scary, and you know that's like to me what I think of when I go back to the old Castlevania games. But then again, my favorite one is Simon's Quest, and that's probably less in that vein than a lot of, you know, like even Super Castlevania or Castlevania 1 and 3. And
Simon's Quest is kind of creepy. I think it's
yeah,
actually the creepiest Castlevania game.
right, exactly, yeah. So I guess my point here is to sort of argue with myself and and say that
Yeah.
like, you know, I like a lot of it, I guess, is
Yeah.
my point. So
And yeah, and that's, that's kind of where I'm at too. Like there's Castlevania means a lot of different things, and it can manifest in a lot of different ways in the same way like that original Dracula story I think can, you know, manifest in a lot of different ways too. And like vampire stories in general, like you have like, you know, a book like The Historian, and then you also have the movie The Lost Boys. And those are both vampire stories, but they're just completely different. And I kind of like both of them for, in their own ways and stuff. So all right, so we still want to get to
Castlevania
Castlevania
3.
3. um but before we go on to that, um where do you want to see this Netflix series go?
I want to see it continue to move in a direction where it feels more adventurous.
Mm.
The sequence in, I believe, episode 3, where Trevor and Sypha are like in the basement. Maybe that's episode 3 or 4. I'm not sure, but they're in the basement of the castle, and there's like all those gears, like the clock tower
Mm.
type vibe and all that stuff, and they're like falling and jumping and running out. Like to me, it was like, okay, this is a fun adventure, you know, and
Mm.
we're capturing some of the adventure stuff. Like when Trevor's like pulling people's eyes out of their sockets and like, you know, killing soldiers in the street and stuff. I'm like, you know, I was watching that scene and I was like, wait a minute, I thought in Castlevania games I fight monsters. You know what I mean? Like I'm like one dude running around fighting a monster for the, you know, a bunch of monsters for the most part. And
Mm-hmm.
instead I'm like, oh, you evil priests are hypocritical and I'm gonna kill you out. Like maybe not kill, but whatever. It's just like to me that was like, oh man, this doesn't feel like Castlevania. But then as the show went on and they were in a basement, like jumping on gears and, you know, having this cool battle with Alucard and all this stuff, I was like, okay, that's the Castlevania vibe I'm looking for. So I wanted to continue to go in that direction. Like instead of seeing the gargoyle, like an army of gargoyles or vampire gargoyles or like whatever, like we did in the first and second episodes, I want to see like the creature of the Black Lagoon type monsters from like the Castlevania games. And I want to see more, like, I guess I want to see a larger variety of monsters, because that you get that in Castlevania, right? Like a lot of
Mm-hmm.
different types of monsters, like where are the Medusa heads and stuff like that. Like I want to see that kind of thing. And I want to see it continue to be at least a little more lighthearted and adventurous feeling. And if they could throw some classic Castlevania music in, that'd be great too. Although I honestly don't. I mean, I think they've chosen a direction in terms of music, and they're not going to go the other way. But yeah, more adventurous and fun, and I feel like it was moving in that direction already. So just to keep going on that trajectory is what I want to see. But some variety of monsters would go a long way too. That would be huge.
No, I totally agree with that. Like I do think you still need some like human drama and some like human conflict, because I do think it would get boring if it was just action and just fighting monsters and
Yeah.
stuff, like just survival. I think there need to be human elements of human opposition as well. In there. But I think, uh, yeah, but I think some more adventure would definitely be cool. I hope that they really find their footing and they can kind of continue like the story and like, and this is like looking way far in the future, but I hope like the story doesn't necessarily end. We know we're working towards the conclusion of Trevor and his party defeating Dracula, but as we know from like the games, that's not where the series ended. And I think like there's a lot of really cool directions they could take it. I like again going back to I love the way they took it with the story of Simon's Quest, which this Castlevania 3 is a prequel to Castlevania's 1 and 2, and Simon is again like descended from the Belmonts, and then he defeats Dracula at the end of Castlevania 1, but then he's kind of like cursed, and then like Dracula's followers, what do they do in Castlevania 2? Do they like chop up his body and hide the pieces, or does Simon do that? Or
I'm not sure how the body gets distributed, or who does the chopping, but yeah, you're collecting all the pieces of Dracula,
yeah,
basically, so you can put him back together and kill him for good, right?
Yeah,
which is awesome.
Yeah,
but
like going into like creepy mansions and like those creepy towns and stuff. Like I think the team on the Castlevania Netflix series, like I think they would have a lot of fun doing some of like the really weird stuff that is in Castlevania 2, and I'd love to see it go that way.
Yeah, and I think I probably haven't given the show enough credit for. I don't know that they always did like the best possible job of this, but you could definitely see where they had the goal to sort of balance like levity and fun with like darker and like heavier themes and stuff. Like even in that second episode, I remember there was all the stuff with like Trevor got in that bar fight or whatever, and then he's like stumbling around puking, and like he was swearing way more than I think was necessary. But like the music was a little more lighthearted, and it was clearly like, okay, we can have fun with this and we can make this a little goofy. And they did do that, and I think they did an okay job with that stuff. Like, but for me, I'd rather see like when they're going to try to be a little more lighthearted and goofy and fun, like pull away from like the swearing and like the drinking stuff, and like maybe go more in the direction of like what's already there in the games, because I think that scene could have been replaced, like the whole like, I don't know, he talks to those seekers or whatever they're called, and like speakers, that's what it is, the speakers. They offer him a drink and he's like, yeah, okay, sure, like, and then they tell him it's water and he's like, oh, never mind, I only like booze, like
I thought that was funny. I thought that line was funny.
it was funny enough, but it's like I could see like let's get the Trevor just loves to drink alcohol humor replaced with something like a little more lighthearted that seems to come from Castlevania, you know. I don't know. But anyway, I guess my point is that they're not afraid to have some fun, right? And they're not afraid to have it be
Yeah.
goofy. So like let's get a little more of that stuff, but maybe goofy like in the way that the Castlevania games were goofy with, you know, monsters and, you know, colorful stuff and that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, if they want to go weird in like Castlevania fashion, like you don't really need to look much further than like some of the Igarashi games, which are full of just like super weird, um,
Like
stuff
a
from like
circus level and stuff like that, right? Like
yeah, and from like the food you pick up and like the um you know the skeleton waiters that throw curry and like the vacuuming maids and um there's so much weird stuff like if you really want to get into it that like I would love to see them pull from some of that.
yeah, absolutely. Because that's what I love. Like right there, like those Igarashi games, like a lot of them, they did go for way more story, you know. And like I think Ego was like super into the timeline and like how all
Hmm.
this stuff fit together. But he was also like into having like skeleton waiters throwing food at you, you know. Like I think that balance is still there in the games, like even all the way up through the Ego games, like the balance of like lightheartedness, goofiness, like monster movie vibe is there and you know it's kind of in the show but I think they could do a better job of like bringing that monster movie goofy vibe in a little more. They did sometimes like with the Cyclops. I think it was kind of there, you know. And
Hmm.
but yeah, I think they could definitely do more. Maybe they're planning on doing more, and that's what I'm hoping to see.
Cool, cool. All right, so let's go ahead and get into the game that this is based on, and that is Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse for the NES. We've both been playing this game. Um, Recently, we wanted to, it was kind of a last minute thing, but we were like, oh, we should play this game and talk about it. It's not really a Castlevania game we've talked about on the podcast before. It's certainly of the NES games, it's the one I'm least familiar with for sure. It is the only NES Castlevania game I have not finished, and it remains that even after revisiting it the past few days. Um, but it's still a game that I like quite a bit, and I think there's a lot of really cool stuff going on with it. So yeah, let's just go ahead and get into it. What is your history with this game?
I don't have a lot of history with this game. I did not own it on the NES, and I've definitely never beaten it. I've played it here and there, probably a little bit on Virtual Console. I don't know if I ever owned a Castlevania game. Maybe I owned Simon's Quest, I think. No, I'm pretty sure I did own a Simon's Quest as a kid. But I don't know that I had the first one or the third one. But the way NES games worked back then is that everybody had an NES and everybody either rented or played like tons and tons of games, you know? So
Mhm.
there's a ton of NES games that I have some passing familiarity with or have played a little bit, but never played a ton of. And I think that this Castlevania 3 falls into that category for me. So I've definitely never beaten it. I've played it here and there, like a little bit as an adult, and I played it, I think, a little bit as a kid, but that's about it for me. This is probably, I mean, I think this is for sure the most I've ever played of it is trying to play through all of it for the show. But I didn't, was not able to do that.
I'm really glad. Like I texted you earlier and was
You
like,
did.
"Hey, did
I thought I was in
you
trouble.
did you beat Castlevania 3?" Because I definitely did not.
I thought I was in trouble when you sent that text. So,
Yeah, I was kind of I was kind of feeling the pressure towards the end there. But it's just a really hard game, and it's a game that takes um, a lot of practice and a lot of memorization, I think. in addition to like just reflexes and stuff. And you know, it's a hard enough game that even like I think we both were playing on the 3DS virtual console, which, you know, does allow for save states, but even with the save states being there, like you still, like, unless you're just going to use a save state every 3 seconds, which isn't a really fun way to play a video game, um, you still like really have to like learn this game um, to be, you know, to get through it. So
Yeah, for sure. I don't know, like there's a password feature, right? But I never really use that because of the save states. So I don't know how
yeah,
generous that is. Like, you know, if I put in a password to take me to like the 6th level, like do I start with how many lives do I start with? How much health do I start with? Like what like does it record like what like sub item you had and all that stuff? Or like I'm not sure how all that works,
no,
but
you can use a password. You can use help me, which gets you 10 lives if
okay.
you input that as your name. And then you can the passwords, you can have 10 lives, and um you can start at any level with any of the companions.
Okay.
So like, I mean, they're generous in that way, but this game is like way, like the North American version is actually harder than
Yeah.
the Famicom version. Enemies take off more life, especially in like the later stages. Um, so I mean, even just like, even having 10 lives like doesn't really do that much for you because um I found like, I mean, I made it up to like, I made it into Dracula's castle, which is kind of like the final stretch of like 4 stages, and I made it up to the battle with death, and that was the point where I was like, I yeah, this is it's starting to stress me out, and I'm not really like having as much fun with it. So that's kind of where I stopped and just um
Did you have a good
watched the
sub weapon
playthrough.
when you were fighting death?
No, I had
Don't
um
say the knife.
I had the knife or the axe,
Oh.
which it was, or maybe holy water. I don't know. It was not very helpful.
I've been trying to hold on to the cross as much as possible because that one I quite
Yeah.
like, you know. So
And when I watched the long play, and when I watched that fight, the player was using the cross with the uh, 3 multiplier.
mm,
So he was throwing like 3 crosses at a time, and then they were like coming back and hitting death again, and it took like 5 seconds.
yeah,
Which I was definitely not in that position when I rolled up to that fight. So
yeah.
um, yeah, but overall, like, what are your thoughts on the game?
I love the fact that it is very much the classic Castlevania style, you know, action platformer. I think the environments are really, really cool.
Mm.
I think the fact that you can choose kind of your route on your way to the castle is also really cool. So all those things are great. I think it's too hard. I mean, you know, it would be more fun, I think, if it was not as difficult as it is. It's hard to really get into like a rhythm of playing through the levels and playing through the game for me, anyways, just because like it's so tough. I can see where the difficulty. I do see like the possibility for this game, like if you really have it memorized and you know it super well, how you could like play through it and not find it as difficult like as I do right now. For instance, you know, you're just talking about like the battle with death and how it's like what turns you off of the game. But if you know, like if you have the right sub weapon and you know the right method or whatever, like you can do it like really easily. And I feel like that's the case with a lot of like really hard old NES games. Like once you memorize the patterns and
Mm-hmm.
you know the optimal route or the optimal like weapon layout or whatever that you need, they can become a lot less tough. So I don't know. I will say that in the last year or two, I've played both Castlevania and Castlevania 2, through to completion. And this one is like, in a lot of ways, it feels like the best of the NES games in terms of like, I don't know, it's like a lot like Castlevania, like the first Castlevania, except for it adds in all these additional things that weren't in the original Castlevania, and it looks better, and it evolves that whole thing. But at the end of the day, I think I prefer like the more simple and less difficult, Castlevania 1 to this one. So I don't know. I mean, I think it's great, and if it wasn't as hard as it was, I'd probably be, a little more excited about it. But as of now, it's like, my least favorite of the NES games, just because I feel like it's just really tough to play. I hope Jeremy Johnson's not listening to this, because I'm be so embarrassed, because he could probably beat it like in 40 minutes or something, like without a problem. But like, I don't know. For me, it's hard.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, that's kind of where I come down on it as well. Like, and yeah, like I played through Castlevania 1 and 2 in the past year, or the past couple years, whenever we did the
Yeah,
Castlevania
2
2
was a
episode.
while ago, if that's the
Yeah,
last time you played it.
but I played through Castlevania 1 on the Famicom Classic Mini,
Yeah.
which, um, yeah, and like I've played through like Super Castlevania 4 on cartridge with no save states or anything. I played through Rondo of Blood on the Wii Virtual Console, no save states. Like I can like, I'm definitely not great at Castlevania games, traditional style Castlevania games, but I can usually get through them. Whereas like this one just feels so overwhelming, to me. Like I was, after the first few stages, I was just it was tough. But we made it up to Dracula's castle, and I've like, really, when I watched the video of like how much I had left to go, it was like 15 minutes. So um yeah, but it's a tough game for sure.
Yeah, I think I'm in the, like, maybe the basement of the castle or something like that.
Mm.
Is about where I am. So I have like a little bit to go, I think, but the more of the game is getting like to the castle in the first place than actually going through the castle, I think, right?
Yeah.
So maybe I'm like 65 or 70% of the way through.
Okay. Did you do the death battle?
No,
Okay.
no.
Okay.
But I'm like, I think I'm in the basement, because I got to the point where you have the branching paths, and then you're kind of like, I think it stops branching, right? When you get to the
Yeah.
castle. That's about
Mhm.
where I am, I think.
Okay. So
So
yeah. Okay. Um yeah, so I definitely agree with like what you were saying about how good it looks, and like how, the setting is really great. Like I think it has a super interesting color palette. There's a lot of like really weird colors, like a lot of like purples and um like, I don't know, like dark bright colors, if that makes any sense. It's almost like it borders on gaudy at
mhm.
times, um but I think it ends up like looking really, really cool with a lot of just like purples and like dark greens. And that's something I was definitely noticing as I was playing, is it's just like a really striking color palette.
You could almost describe that as like, I don't know, maybe this is not accurate, but like as you're describing that, and I'm totally, it's like what I love about Castlevania. It's almost like a pop horror thing. You know what I mean? In the
Mm-hmm.
same way that like these like monsters in these Castlevania games, they're not like really horrific. It's like pop horror, Um, and yeah, I love that. I love that, and that's totally in Castlevania 3. And I know we don't want to go like back to the show too much, because now we're talking about Castlevania 3, but like I don't get so much of that pop horror vibe, from the show. So, and the style they're going for, what they're doing with the show, it's not really what they're going for, so that's fine. But I'd love to see an adaptation that does in at some point in some way that does go more in that like pop, or even just another video game. That'd be great. Like I'd love to see another video game that goes more in that like pop horror kind of vibe, like color palette, presentation, etc. It reminds me of like the difference between like a Friday the 13th movie and then like Friday the 13th on NES. Like he's in a purple jumpsuit with like a aqua blue mask. Like I love that.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome.
No, that
And it
is
doesn't
good.
mean everything Friday the 13th has to be like purple jumpsuit and an aqua blue mask, but like, man, I like it when they go that way. So
Yeah.
I could totally see something like that from Castlevania going forward.
No, that's very valid. I agree. Um, so I think I mean, for the most part, I don't feel like the kind of moment to moment gameplay and level design is super far removed from the original Castlevania.
Yep.
From the first game. Like it's a lot of, walking upstairs and jumping over platforms and like, hey, here's some spikes, like here's Medusa heads, here's different types of skeletons you're fighting. And there's some like minor changes.
Man, I'm sorry.
Some of the
Trevor never
different
fought a
enemies.
skeleton in the Castlevania show, did he? Like, fight some skeletons.
No.
Fight
Mm.
some skeletons.
Well, there's probably not skeletons just like hanging out in town though, and it like mostly took place in town. Because man, if I was living in that town and there were just like skeletons hanging out and like walking around, I probably wouldn't live in that town.
Yeah, no, probably
Um,
not. Yeah.
but uh, but yeah, so I don't feel like, I mean, they do some interesting stuff like with the collapsing towers where you're either um trying to get up to, you're going vertically to get up as the like ground, as the screen is like shifting below you, or I think is even more interesting is when you have to like be jumping down and like the tower's like collapsing from above. I thought like that stage was super interesting, but other than that, like the gameplay isn't really any different. Trevor is not really any more agile than Simon in the original game. Like you still have very little control over your jumps after you've kind of made that initial lunge. You're still not really you can't like jump and land on stairs. Um, you
Can
still
I tell
can't
you?
like
Can I tell you
whip.
something embarrassing?
Sure.
As I was playing this game, like early on, I kept trying to like, press both the like left or right and the up or down button on the D-pad to go like up or down stairs, and I kept like dying, like falling down and like not getting on the
Mm,
stairs. It took me a little while to remember or realize like, oh yeah, you're just supposed to, like, if you want to go up steps, you just like walk over by the steps and then press up on the D-pad.
mhm.
Try to like actually angle like the D-pad to get him to go up. But I feel like in Castlevania 1 that is what you need to do. Like you have to press like between, you press both like left and up to go up the staircase to the left. Maybe I'm wrong on that. I'm going to play it tonight when we're done
Yeah.
recording, because I'm like in the mode to play some like classic Castlevania. So I'm going to like pull out the
Yeah.
NES Classic and play the original. But I feel like in that game you do like, have to use the diagonal on the D-pad. In this game, you just press up or down to go like up or down stairs, which is actually great once I realized that. But I
Yeah.
spent a while being like, God, I can't even walk upstairs. So I'm a real pro when it comes to Castlevania.
Well, we are the authorities on the subject. Yeah, it's funny too. I don't want to digress too much, but I've obviously been in like a super big Castlevania mood after like watching the show and playing Castlevania 3. And I went back and I recorded a video playing some Super Castlevania 4 on the Wii U Virtual Console. And again, like, we kind of talked about this on the last episode, but that game is so good. There are so many improvements to the Castlevania formula in just like the the jumping movements, the jumping onto stairs, the diagonal whip movements and stuff. Like it, man, it feels like such an improvement from going from Castlevania 3 to Castlevania 4, and that game does not get enough credit at all. So, but yeah, that video is up on our YouTube channel. I played through the first few stages of Super Castlevania 4 and kind of talk about it. So check that out for sure. Yeah, so like one last thing that really struck me as cool replaying this is in stage 8-1. It's and this is something that's been done in like multiple Castlevania games, but it's a pretty cool homage to the first stage of the original Castlevania, complete with the the torn curtains in the castle entryway, and like the music is the same and everything. I thought that was pretty cool. But I don't know. I think like the music in general, and this might just be because I haven't played this one as much and I didn't like grow up playing it as much as I did Castlevania 1 or 2. I feel like the music's really good in Castlevania 3, but it's not as memorable to me as the music in Castlevanias 1 and 2. But I mean, it's still a really good soundtrack.
For sure. And this is one of the Castlevanias. I don't think it's the only one, but this is like this Castlevania in Japan. The Famicom cart shipped with like an additional chip or an improved chip, so the soundtrack has more channels and is a little different in the Japanese version than the American one, right? So
yes,
I want to play the Japanese version, knowing it's easier.
Yeah,
I want to play that one. So I don't have a Famicom, and I definitely don't have the cart, but it would be cool to play for sure.
And I looked on the Japanese 3DS eShop because I have a Japanese 3DS, and it is not available there because I was hoping to play that.
Fingers crossed for Switch, right? It would be awesome to be able to get like Japanese versions of Virtual Console games. So,
that would
in fact,
be cool.
And even the way like software works on maybe it wouldn't work this way with Virtual Console, but like if you have like Zelda or whatever, if you boot it up in your Japanese account, like it kind of boots up the Japanese version of the game, doesn't it? To a certain extent.
Yeah, I wonder how that will work for Virtual Console, because with like NES games where you get like the Famicom Disk System version if you load up like Metroid.
Yeah, probably not, because it's a totally different ROM and stuff, right? But it would be cool if it did.
That would be cool.
But I'll buy it. It's fine. I'll buy it.
Sure.
I'll buy the Japanese one if necessary.
Sure. I actually just my order just went through today for my Mondo vinyl soundtrack for Castlevania 3, which includes the NES version of the music and the Famicom version. So I'm really looking forward to really giving that a listen and comparing when that arrives. So
that's awesome. That's cool.
Yeah. So cool. I do real quick before we wrap up here want to talk a little bit about the story in Castlevania 3 to kind of connect it to the animated series, because there's some did you read the text at the text scroll at the beginning of the game before you started it?
Yeah, with like the film strip thing going on. Yeah, I read that. I don't know if I remember it too well or not, but yeah, I read that.
Okay, so I wanna read one of my favorite lines. I'm going to kind of paraphrase here. So like there, it kind of starts off, and it's something along the lines of like, a long time ago there lived a person named Dracula. He practiced sorcery in order to create a bad world filled with evil. And I just really love that. Like, just that translation there. Like, there was a person named Dracula who wanted to make a bad world.
I think that's awesome. He doesn't sound as likable as the TV show version based on that introduction, but yeah.
No,
Um,
no. So then something else in there that is more related to the TV show is it talks about um, how townspeople became afraid of the Belmont's power and asked them to leave the country. So that line there is definitely an influence on the show because there is a lot of conflict between Trevor and the townspeople at the beginning because they hate the or distrust the Belmont clan.
yeah.
So that was kind of cool, like seeing that in there, because yeah, that's a I don't know, that's like what little story there is in Castlevania 3. Like that is a really interesting part of it.
Yeah, 100%. I thought that was cool. And I like that in the show too. Like independently, it's not really because I remembered that or knew that from the game, but just I
Mhm.
thought that was like, it was cool. It was well done. And it felt kind of gamey, and kind of silly. Not silly, but just, I don't know. It felt, it got like the fantasy adventure vibe from that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, yeah. Um, and then when you finish the game, after I know this because I watched watched the playthrough and I watched someone else beat it. They're in like the ending text. There's something along the lines of like, after this fight, the Belmont name shall be honored by all people. So it's kind of like, you know, Trevor restored the Belmont name, and I'm assuming that will be a part of the story, and the
of season
conclusion
2.
of the story in the Netflix show. Yeah. Um,
Yeah, and it kind of leads up to Castlevania 1, right? Because then you have like another
mhm.
Belmont who's picking up the mantle and all that. So,
Yeah.
I think it'd be awesome if the Netflix show kind of went that route too. Like, and they could even they could change like creative teams, they could change art style, they could change all kinds of stuff if they decided to do like a season or two based on the original Castlevania. But
Mhm.
since they've already told this prequel story, it would be cool to, or they're in the process of telling it now. But yeah, I
Mhm.
think it would be cool to go that way with the show.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially like to get to Castlevania 2, which I think is a much more interesting story. The most interesting story and setting of the NES trilogy, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um, I think that would be really cool, even if they only did like half a season on like Castlevania 1, and then I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot more to work with Simon's Quest, but
We should say too, if we go back to or think back to like when we did our episode about Simon's Quest, I remember
Mhm.
saying when we recorded that one that Simon's Quest might be my favorite Castlevania game, and part of the reason I like it so much is because even though it's confusing, like super confusing at times, and completing the game can be tough for that reason, the actual like difficulty of like the combat and the platforming and stuff is not that high in Castlevania 2 compared to
Right.
especially this game. And so, I can see where some people would be disappointed by that. I love that, like I want to soak up that world. I want to go on an adventure. I want to like fight Dracula. But I don't want to be like frustrated out of my mind as I do it.
Mhm.
And, Simon's Quest does frustrate you out of your mind in different
In
ways.
different ways, yeah.
But I like the fact that like it's a little more gentle in terms of the combat and stuff.
Mhm.
And it's more about exploring and completing a journey sort of than maybe other Castlevania games. So
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I feel like the Igavania, most of those, with the exception of like Order of Ecclesia, I think most of those kind of give that vibe as well. Like
sure.
I replayed Symphony of the Night um, after watching the Netflix series, and that's a game I know like really, really well. So I was able to get through, both castles in that in about 8 hours. Um, which I mean is not like a super great time or anything like speedrun wise, but it was just like, I mean, the point is like I was able to play through it in like a couple sittings. Um, but yeah, that game again, like I don't think it's like super hard. It definitely has some like challenging moments and stuff if you're underprepared in certain sections, but it does, it's way, way more accessible um, for me. So yeah. But yeah. Last thing about Castlevania 3. Um, in the credits, the end credits, they do not give any credits to any creators of the game. It just says like um, Dracula 3 team, basically. But they give the credits to the characters. In like, I don't know, again, I guess kind of going for that filmic uh, approach. And my favorite part there is when it gets to Trevor Belmont, and then in quotes at the bottom of the screen, it says Trevi B, which I hope that makes it into the Netflix series.
Yeah.
I I hope you know someone somewhere calls Trevor Trevi B. I think that's what I want to see in the Netflix series.
Okay. All right.
Going
I
forward,
mean,
that's what I want in season 2 is for someone to call him Trevi B.
that would definitely be an example of the show taking itself a little less seriously, and I think I would like that for sure.
I would like that too.
Yeah.
Okay. Any last words on Castlevania 3 or the Netflix series?
Um, no, I guess with the Netflix series, just overall, I like the show. So I feel like a lot of my comments tonight have been maybe more like I've probably made more negative comments than positive ones.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, it's a win for me. It's a hit. Like I like it. It's just there's definitely some big stuff that like I would totally do differently, but like at the end of the day, I think it was pretty well done, and I liked it quite a bit, and I'm pretty excited to see the second season because it's like a show that only improved as it went on, I think. So yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. Not my version of Castlevania, but still a pretty good one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm definitely enjoyed it. Definitely looking forward to season 2, and it did in a lot of ways like kind of rekindle my love of the series and get me going back to some of the like the classic games and stuff, which I mean I think that makes it a success right there. I just like I said, I replayed Symphony of the Night, which I hadn't done in a few years, and that remains one of my favorite video games ever. And then I actually dabbled in a few of the other games, and then right now I'm working my way back through Aria of Sorrow, so on the Wii U Virtual Console, and that game is super good too. And maybe after I finish that, maybe I'll do Dawn of Sorrow. But I also kind of splurged, and in addition to buying the vinyl soundtracks for the original trilogy, I also ordered a copy of Bloodlines on Genesis, which
Oh, that's
is
not cheap, I don't think, is it?
it's not cheap, but I found it at a price that I was okay with, in a condition I was okay with.
Okay.
We'll see when it actually arrives. You never know when buying things online, but um, if it comes as advertised, I'm going to be pretty satisfied with my purchase. But that is one that it's never been released on Virtual Console or anything. and it's one I have played maybe 5 minutes of um, on Genesis. So like I I think I tried it once when I was working at a video game store. I popped it in and just like tested it um, when we got in a copy, but I've never owned it, never even rented it, um, never played a ROM or anything of it. So yeah, that's something and it's just something I'm happy to add to my collection. But we'll see, because I've heard that it, like Castlevania 3, is quite a challenge. So we'll see how it feels, how I respond to it, and I don't know. I'm excited to dig in. Have you ever played Bloodlines?
I don't think I have. No. Mm-mm.
Cool, cool. Well, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Do you have any? I know you usually wait until around Halloween before you play your Castlevania games, but this Halloween, I think we're all going to be playing some Mario Odyssey. So
Yeah.
maybe now's the time to get those Castlevanias out.
Yeah, it could be. I think I'll keep playing Castlevania 3. And then I'm not sure. I'd like to play Symphony of the Night, although the only platform I can easily play it on is PS3. And I mean, it's not that big of a deal, but I have to like get my PS3 out of storage, hook it up. And I don't know that I have like a working controller, because I think my son broke, like not totally broke, but like messed up both of our PS3 controllers playing WWE 2K16. So it's not a super convenient way for me to play that game. So I wish that it would come out like on PC or on Switch, or, you know, even just PS4 would be awesome. So I'd like to play Symphony of the Night, but yeah, no concrete plans. But Castlevania is a series that, like, in the summer or the fall, like I like to play in the summer too. So we'll see. You know, there's a lot. I'm falling behind on the Switch already, though. I'm falling behind like with a lot of stuff games wise. So.
Yeah.
I feel like Castlevania 3 might be my main Castlevania experience for the summer here, but
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, yeah, I guess that wraps up this episode. Like I said, check out our YouTube channel, Nintendo Fun Club Podcast, over on YouTube. Subscribe there. I did just record, like I said, Super Castlevania 4, and I also recorded some Circle of the Moon as well, first half hour or so of that. You can check out our blog over at nintendofunclubpodcast.com. And I'm on Twitter at Brandwarf, BRAWNDWARF. And what about you, John?
I am on Twitter at Arcade Ghost.
Cool. And if you are into Star Wars and Star Wars games, which I know you are, John, because you just recorded a super cool video of the Star Wars. What is the subtitle?
Attack on the Death Star.
Attack on the Death Star on the Sharp X68000 computer.
Yeah, that is a super, super cool game. Like wireframe vector graphic type look to it with, early 90s, like digitized like sound, lots of voices and lines from the movie. It's like a really short game. Continues the theme of like games I can't beat, because I didn't finish it. I didn't blow up the Death Star, although I watched some other videos of the game online, and I didn't see anybody blow up the Death Star in any of the videos I watched. So I think it might be a tough thing to accomplish, but yeah, I think like for me, I made the video for our other show, the Blockade Runner, just because like I think it's a game that most probably North American Star Wars fans like don't really know about, and like that in itself would make it like worth checking out, but like also it just looks so cool. It has such a unique look to it that it was like, got to do this one. So
cool. So where can people find that stuff?
blockaderunnerpodcast.com is the blog, and our YouTube channel is just, I think, the Blockade Runner. So you could search for that on YouTube.
Cool, cool. All right. Well, that wraps up this episode. Thank you a ton for tuning in, and we will catch you next time. Goodbye.
Bye bye.